Every so often, I get an email from a reader asking if I want to come review his car. And I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll set something up in the next few months. Then I got an email from Ken, who lives in Canada, and told me that he imported this, a 2001 TVR Tuscan. I immediately got in my car and drove 9.5 hours to review it. If you want to know what I think about driving the Tuscan, go to autotrader.com/oversteer or check out the link to my column below this video. This video, I'm going to show you around the Tuscan. And boy, is there a lot to show. Before I get started showing you the TVR, some North American viewers might be wondering exactly what the hell it is. TVR is a British car company that sold sports cars until folding about a decade ago. Being a 2001 model, this Tuscan is one of their later offerings, and one of their more ridiculous looking, that Ken imported because in Canada you can legally import any car after it reaches 15 years old. The Tuscan has a straight 6 engine, about 370 horsepower, and these days a nice one costs between $30,000 and $40,000 US. Oh, and this particular Tuscan is one of only 5 or 6 in all of Canada, and thus the entire Western Hemisphere. It's also insane. If you thought of this as a Dodge Viper meets a Lotus Elise, you'd be in the right ballpark, except it's insaner. Here's what I mean. We'll start in back. Take a quick look at the car and you'll notice there are no visible brake lights. That's because they're hidden below where you'd expect them to be, inexplicably just above the exhaust. But even crazier than the brake lights, the turn signals. This is their factory position. Even crazier than the rear end styling of this car is the front end styling, and especially the headlights that are separated into 4 distinct pieces. The other crazy thing about the front of the TVR is the hood situation. There are 2 of them. The front hood, or the service bonnet in TVR parlance, opens right up. But where's the engine? That would be in the rear hood, which, from a factory position, is actually bolted down. Now, this particular TVR has had the rear hood modified so that you can actually access it, in case you want to get to the engine, as you probably will in a TVR. Here's what it looks like with the rear hood open so that you can have access to the engine. We're still not really sure why it didn't come like this from the factory, which is something that can be said quite a bit about this car. For example, the battery. Where would you guess the battery is? The engine bay? The trunk? Wrong. It is placed behind the front wheel. And worse than that, the jumper connector faces down under the battery towards the ground, and it's open, which means that stuff gets in there and it shorts. You can imagine that fires ensue. Now, when a fire ensues, of course, the first thing you do, you open up your hood and you shoot it with a fire extinguisher, except your hood is bolted down. And then there's the other problem. In order to change the battery, you have to remove the tire. And then there's getting inside. You'll notice that this door does not actually have a door handle on it. To get inside this vehicle, you press a button located below the mirror. The door opens right up. Seems simple enough, unless, of course, you have a dead battery. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's talk about what happens when you lock the car. When you lock it, the windows go up, regardless of the position you had them in when you turned it off. This leads to a problem. If you have the roof on, you're outside the car, and the battery dies. How the hell do you get inside? Fortunately, TVR thought of this issue, and they gave the car emergency door releases with only one little issue. They're inside the car. So if you lock yourself out of the car and the battery goes dead, you'd better really hope the roof is off so that you can climb in and open the doors. Now, when you're inside the car, one of the first things you'll notice is that the interior of the door does not have a handle so that you can get out. So to get out of the car, you pull a handle, push a button here, here. No. It is actually an unlabeled button next to the stereo. The other weird thing about the doors and windows, if you want to get in the car and the window is up, you push the button, and then you have to wait for the window to lower halfway before you can open the door. And then when you shut it, it goes back up halfway. And then there are the windows. The window switches are some of the strangest window switches I've ever seen in a car. It's not just an up-down. It is actually a switch that you turn and then the window rolls down, except it doesn't roll down at a constant pace. It just sort of goes at the speed that it wants to. The other crazy thing about the windows, the driver's side, you pull it towards you to roll the window down at the speed it wants to go, and you push it forward to bring the window back up. The passenger side, of course, the exact opposite. The gauge cluster is quite an interesting experience. Now, my personal favorite gauge is the fuel one, which just sort of disappears as you go through fuel. There are also some vents mounted on the steering column, even though this car doesn't have air conditioning. They send air towards you. There are also vents at the top, pointing towards the windshield, and there are some on the floor. Although you can't direct where the air goes, you can only close and open the vents and hope for the best. Also inside and unusual is the tachometer, which is this strange digital thing. Now let's talk about the roof. In a normal Targa Top car, you can pull off the roof and stow it or take it away. In this one, you can also pull off the back window, which is a plexiglass piece that you can remove and put back at any time you want. Now, in terms of curb weight, this car weighs in at 2,400 pounds, or 1,100 kilograms. You may be wondering how a car like this can weigh so little. Well, the answer is this. Anti-lock brakes? No. Dual airbags? No. Side airbags? No. Traction control? No. Stability control? No. It doesn't have any of that crap. There is one practical thing about the TVR though, and that is its trunk, which is surprisingly large, presumably so that it can hold a lot of wrenches and tools if you have to work on it on the roadside. Speaking of the trunk, you might be wondering about this thing. Well, because the turn signals are not fitted to the body of the car, and instead they're up here, when the trunk is open, the turn signals and thus the hazard lights are obscured. And so by law in the UK, if your hazard lights are obscured when your trunk is open, your vehicle must exhibit a triangular exclamation point to let other road users know that you're a hazard. The last interesting thing about the trunk, if you want to put fuel in the car, naturally they put it in the trunk. And they put it in the worst possible place, so it's incredibly difficult to get leverage, oh my god, in order to remove the fuel cap. So there you've had it. You've now had a full tour of one of the only TVR Tuscans in this hemisphere. I'm completely mesmerized by it, and yet I haven't even driven it yet. For more on that, click the link below to check out my column on Auto Trader Oversteer.